Welcome everyone to Australian Institute of Geoscientists Queensland Branch AIG-ALS Technical Series talk. Today's talk is on gold deposits of northeast Queensland from an exploration perspective with reference to the Chillagoe District by Cameron Switzer. Without further ado, I'll move on to today's talk. As I mentioned, with Cameron Switzer from Switzer Geological Services. His day job is with Newcrest Mining. Cam didn't want to give me a bio, so I've made one up. Although he did describe himself as a grumpy geologist, I added the old. He's had 3 attempts at working with Newcrest Mining, initially as a graduate, and more recently in his current role as Exploration Manager Asia Pacific. As well as dabbling in coal from time to time, Cameron has also worked for Straits Resources, Acacia and MIM Exploration. Ever a sucker for punishment, he's also taken on roles as President and CEO and Non-Executive Director for Junior Explorers. He graduated with a BSc in Geology and Earth Sciences from UNE and completed his honours and MSc at JCU, so he's well versed in northwest Queensland geology. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Cameron.
And welcome everybody. I hope this talk gives itself justice today. So what I'm going to talk about today are gold deposits of northeast Queensland from an exploration perspective. And I'm going to reference the Chillagoe District as it was a fascinating area I had the opportunity to work on, albeit for a short period of time, about 3 years ago. This was done under the work of Switzer Geological Services, obviously prior to my Newcrest role. There's some acknowledgements first and foremost. Firstly, as I mentioned, it was completed as part of a Newcrest Operations and Actus Resources, a joint venture. So the people I'd like to acknowledge are all the people who have worked here in the past, obviously the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy, the fantastic groundwork that's been done by Klondike Exploration, and that in particular, that's Greg Morrison, obviously. Simon Beams and the Terra Search teams with all the publications on this fascinating part of the world. The JCU Geology Collective, all my work colleagues who you're going to see some photos of here at the moment. Obviously the AIG, Amira, all the work that they did in the late 80s, early 90s on this, and I will show photos, but I'll just pay reference and homage to them right now. And any other of the geologists who are out there listening in today that have worked on these rocks. So thank you indeed. Obviously, let's start with the regional geology. This is really fundamentally important. North of the line on the right-hand side over here, north of the Charters Towers province, the 4 dominant intrusive related gold deposits of North Queensland are located. The Charters Towers province is obviously a significant dislocation and structural tectonic feature. Has age ranges all the way back from the Proterozoic all the way through to the earliest times and over to the east, obviously the Permian with the northern end of the Bowen Basin. North of that are the giant intrusive related gold deposits. South of that, the metallogenic distribution changes. You can just see it by the map on the left, just the sheer density of occurrences to the north of the Charters Towers province compared to the south, albeit in the southern areas there is younger cover sequences of obviously the Permian, Bowen and Galilee basins. Obviously, this is well documented since the late 80s, mid 90s, all the time. Obviously, the significance of the Kennedy magmatic suite and intrusive suite, the classic Kennedy association. You see the distribution here on the left-hand side of the tin deposits, the outboard copper and the outboard gold deposits. Fascinating. Recent work actually has collected details of old historic data with the assistance of ALS and new analytical techniques. Have actually determined that there's more fractionation trends and fertility indicators in this data, which is absolutely fantastic and can be applied from an explorations perspective. So I encourage people to look up zircon fractionation here on in. Obviously, so what is the endowment? What are we talking about here? There are 4 districts with 6 deposits, totaling a cumulative metal accumulation right now of 21.1 million ounces. Importantly, in our environment these days, historically these deposits generate cash and significant cash and financial return to all stakeholders. They're absolutely stunning. And of course, the jewel in the crown was the Kidston ore body, with the amount of money it returned to all stakeholders and shareholders. And you can see on the left-hand side the distribution of that mineralisation. Obviously, Ravenswood, 8 million ounces, sitting over here. Mount Lation with 3.5 million ounces. Kidston mined with 5.1, but probably still around about 1 million ounces, as I'm going to show you in a minute, sitting there as well. And obviously the fascinating Red Dome Chillagoe District in the north up in here, which we'll talk a bit more about today. So I actually classify this style of mineralisation, and I put them into two styles of form of mineralisation. There are two end members. So type 1 is what I call XY. So the XY dimension is greater than the Z dimension. And type 2, where the Z dimension is very much greater than the X and Y dimension. And I'll show you why. Kidston is a classic type 1. This is 5.1 million ounces of gold extracted with a 0.1 footprint that measures 1,400 metres by 800 metres in dimension. If you were given the money and you drilled a hole on a kilometre offset grid basis through northeast Queensland, you would find this thing no matter what. It's there. The footprint in an XY direction is absolutely enormous in this. Similarly, with Mount Lation, if you look at the geometry and size of that, although Lation had a 650 metre vertical RL component, the surface dimension is over 900 metres by 500 metres. So again, regional scale drilling or geochemistry will pick these things up. These are big, robust mineralisation geochemical footprint systems. Similarly, with Ravenswood, and then this is the other form of geochemistry, obviously being soil sampling, on a tens of kilometre basis, you would pick up the Ravenswood system here. So again, these systems which have phenomenal east-west lateral extent stand out in the data sets. Type 2, however, is fundamentally different. This is what I call the pencil type, intrusive related gold mineralisation, epitomised primarily by the Mount Wright discovery. You can see the dimension there. So these are small footprint, but can be high-grade intrusive related gold deposits. Mount Wright has a dimension of around about 250 metres by, at its most, 80 metres, and much narrower in many places like that. Importantly, on the right-hand side, you can see over here, although it doesn't have the tenor and the scalability of the other systems that we saw at Kidston, Lation or Ravenswood immediately to the south, it has subtle yet quite significant anomalies which you should pick up in your normal conventional geochemical sampling. So how does this relate to the Chillagoe District? And in looking back at all this, this is the concept for the talk today. Chillagoe was a smelting centre for the surrounding region from about 1890 to 1940. The site processed ores from numerous small mines within a radius of 50 to 150 kilometres. And the ores were predominantly lead and copper, with some silver and small amounts of gold. Now, we sit here today and we view this as primarily a gold province with accessory lead and zinc. The geology back then, they described as principally consisting of massive sulfide ores, small in size but containing rich grades. And many of these deposits were spread across the region. What you can see on the left-hand side is, again, all the diagrams are cut from public announcements and things like that. But what you can see is a 30-kilometre plus long mineralised or semi-mineralised corridor with anomalous geochemistry all the way through it, with hundreds and hundreds of individual mineral occurrences. If you look at long section in the bottom right-hand corner, you see the significance of the Red Dome operation, 2.4 million ounces. The Geological porphyry target in between, the Mungana target, which I'm going to show you a bit about here today, and another target to the north. And you can see that in this corridor, these small, albeit what we call pencils, poke up in these certain structural stratigraphic positions all the way through. So there were two types. you can characterize the Chillagoe region by two types of mineralization. So there's the gold greater than copper style, which Red Dome is the classic example. And you can see on the right-hand side here, fantastic or pretty good gold grades, copper grades. But in general, what you see as you go vertically down in the RL component, the copper grades drop off. So immediately you pick out that there's a zonation to it. The important thing here to draw your eyes to is that the amount of metal internal to the host rhyolites here is very minor. It's all on the margin and the periphery of the intrusive bodies. The other thing I draw your eyes to is the green material over here on the left, on the western side of Red Dome, and the green material immediately above Griffiths Hill. And we'll talk somewhat about that coming up shortly in a minute as well. Griffiths Hill was just the southern extension of the Red Dome ore body. The other end member in the Chillagoe District is obviously the base metal component. And this is epitomised again by the King Vol mineralisation. You can see the high-grade, narrow nature of King Vol, 14% zinc, 8% zinc, 13% zinc, 24% zinc. And this is what people have targeted and gone and been extracting in most recent times. However, if you look in long section at King Vol, for example, you can see it's hard to put together, tough, strong shoot controls, and difficult probably to extract, which is what we also see. In terms of a geochemical surface footprint on the right-hand side here, you can see that the systems are very, very obvious. The simple detailed soil sampling picks out all these systems. And then it's about understanding your detailed geology moving forward after that for your subsequent targeting. So what is Mungana? Mungana is a classic pencil. If you look at the diagram on the left-hand side here, it sits, the porphyry or the rhyolitic porphyry measures around about 40 by 40 metres. This is a tiny spine of mineralised rhyolite, which extends to depths of over 1.1 kilometres. You can see the metal distribution around it. It's uniquely zoned in terms of its gold grade laterally out from it. And you can also see massive zones of sulfides, and these are the lead zinc ore bodies. These are essentially the skarns. And outboard of that, you see again, I think I mentioned the green material before. So what does it look like on surface? It's not obvious. It really isn't obvious. You can walk over this and you would recognize alteration, certain characteristics, but then again, when you put it into the geochemical exploration perspective, this thing stands out. It stands out in stream seds, it stands out in soils, and it becomes an obvious target. But the footprint of this target is nowhere near what a Kidston, a Lation, or a Ravenswood looks like. And further to the end of this presentation, I'll go into the significance of these small footprint beasts, these pencil-type porphyries. So what do we see at Mungana? We see extensive variation in lithologies, alteration, veining, and mineralisation features. We see strong structural and lithological control. We see a classic zonation in mineralogy and textural features. What we see on the bottom left-hand side is we see distal biotite overprinted with albite, and the intensity of which increases towards the structure, coming into strong sericite silica alteration associated with unique quartz veining events as well. We see the first occurrence of actinolite, pyrrhotite, and we start to see things like brown garnet. And when we get into the center of the hotter component of the system, we obviously get wollastonite, pyroxene, garnet. In terms of the carbonate sequence on the other side, perhaps, so the two different types of rock units in the region, the siliclastics and the carbonates. The carbonates, again, a complex replacement of the marble by brown garnet going to green garnet, and also pyroxene veins at depth, and progressing further laterally outward into stylolites, reflecting the density and fracture intensity of orientation. Again, just a schematic on the right-hand side showing those diagrams. So what does this actually look like? In terms of a cross-section through the Mungana ore body, as shown by people like Mike Barr previously, obviously the Mungana granite sits down here, a nice equigranular granite. The rhyolites themselves are fascinating, and people have done PhDs and spent years and years understanding these things, from the classic unidirectional solidification textures, or USTs, in the rhyolites, indicating the flow banding and the viscous nature and fluid component of this beast, versus to the porphyritic vein, but these are not classic copper gold porphyry veins. They're the North Queensland rhyolite classic vein systems, which are typically translucent quartz, to the massive silica flooding above these zones. So there's a classic zonation here and again. And if you actually look at the mineralization at Mungana is uniquely associated with, the gold mineralization is uniquely associated with the bismuth telluride veins, which is the one I'm showing in the cursor down here. So this is bismuth telluride gold, associated with the median line running down this milky white translucent vein. The high grade component, which is classic in the silica breccias that sit above these zones, look like this material in here. So it's not cryptocrystalline, but it's amorphous grey black silica with extremely high grades. Above that zone, again, in the silicates, you go into extensive flooding of the intrusive biosilicate and sulfide veins. And of course, peripheral and adjacent to and marginal to the rhyolite intrusives are the massive skarns, and they extend for 1 to 10 metres. So what happens in the carbonate rocks? Can you be predictable when you're walking in? Can you start to get excited? And what features tell you to keep walking or keep walking faster? So we'll start in the top right-hand corner. What you see on the periphery is the first evidence of stylolisation. These small little fractures and these wispy, wavy silicate bands coming in through here. On a detailed scale, the stylolite intensity increases, and this is quite a dramatic increase. You're probably a couple hundred metres out in drill core. This is what the stylolites look like in the fresh carbonate rocks. This then further increases in intensity to intense stylolitization, and individual bedding planes are being replaced by recryst or recrystallized marble, and you can see the volume effect of that. This again changes subsequently to siderite veining, and parts of the siderite veining actually have components of weak brecciation along sheeted vein fracture arrays. Marginal to it, because all of this is actually dependent upon the composition of those internal carbonate units. Marginal to this, where you get the clean carbonates, you get this massive recrystallization of the carbonate and coarsening of the texture. You know you're getting close on the top right-hand side when you start to see these breccias. And again, these breccias are just geochemically anomalous. Over here, rounded host rock fragments, but the matrix there is typically siderite in cases. And you know you're getting even closer again when the siderite component lifts again, and the matrix to fragment ratio increases dramatically. So what happens when you get on top of this? You know you're getting somewhere, and you know you're getting really close to when you actually start to see evidence of limonite and jarosite staining internal to the carbonate rocks, and you see components of this sulfide staining going layer parallel down in through here. You know things are getting hotter associated with that again, because you start to see evidence of infilling green garnet, and in this case on fracture planes and breccia matrix again. On the bottom, in the middle there, again, you start to see a component of sulfides coming into it. And of course, the real money rock is on the right in through there. What that is that's this classic skarn, but you see there's fragments of sulfide interspersed amongst large garnets as well. And they're brown garnets, classic brown garnets. So there's the zonation on what the rocks look like on surface, from the green garnet to the brown garnet, and going laterally further out all the way to the stylolites. And this actually works, and you can map this all the way in. I mentioned to you before that we had albite. I mentioned to you, look at the green material on the cross section of Red Dome. So previously, this has been logged as chert, in the logging, which is understandably, and now I remember early in my career, I would have put this in as chert, but this is actually Albite alteration. And when you actually look at the zonation, the Albite alteration closer to Red Dome is more intense, and it laterally grades away. If you recall, over the top of Griffiths Hill, this chert band, this thing that was logged as a chert, which is actually Albite, sits right over the top of the Griffiths Hill ore body, which is just the extension of the Red Dome mineralisation. What does it look like in core? This is what it looks like in the top middle slide. Again, you can see lots of boudinaging. It's a distinct alteration feature. And as you drill towards the main ore bodies, the intensity and frequency of this material increases. On surface, many people out there would have rock chip sampled the absolute crikey out of this stuff all the time. You would have written on your descriptor sheets partially or weakly or moderately silicified sediments or carb shales or something like that, but you would have recognized the alteration but not put it into the context that this is Albite alteration. When you go back and have a look at the amount of Albite alteration around places like Kidston, it is staggering. You go back and have a look at the Albite in a much tighter environment such as Ravenswood, it's certainly there as well. I'm not sure on Mount Lation. So as the Albite alteration increases on the surface, you get these big, massive zones. And I remember being so disappointed years ago, sampling all this stuff and absolutely coming back nothing. But now my understanding is I realise why. This is low geochemistry. It's just simple peripheral Albite. What about the silicates? What about the silicates? So what do we see in these systems? So on the top left-hand side, we see the hematite-dominated lower temperature amorphous cryptocrystalline silicate with a bit of nondescript silica in there and weak banding. You see bits of open space, a few botryoids starting to form, but again, it's just massive lower temperature, very, very happy silica. Because it's a brittle unit, it fractures with subsequent structural faulting, as in the middle there. And then blokes like John Nethery will tell you there are epithermals in this district. Well, my word, there are certainly epithermal textures and and this is from the northern part of the Chillagoe Mungana systems as well. And you see the crustiform and coliform banding there undoubtedly. So the Chillagoe systems actually represent a beautifully exposed vertical window from about 1.5 to 2 kilometres in depth. So as we go laterally down and deeper into these systems, what do we get? What you see on surface is on the left-hand side on the left-hand side, you start to see breccia veinlets and fracture stockwork breccias. Again, this is almost like a niche of one of these breccia pipes in this case, but it's a single phase. Beautiful little microveinlet of breccia, and you can see what the breccias probably tail out to above the intrusive sources. So when you put this together, these sorts of features, it's just single phase silica. You get the stockworks as you see down below. They're sheeted in nature, reflecting the strong structural control in this host unit. When you get a little bit hotter from this system, you start to get the classic open space quartz crystals, beautiful higher temperature veins. The photo on the right, again, is what you see on surface when you get the high-grade grey silica. This is not just unique to one deposit. This happens in many of the deposits that I've seen up there today. And again, the bottom right-hand slide shows you the bismuth telluride gold vein. But in the background there, what you see is intense biotite alteration, overprinted by fracture sericite alteration. The interesting thing is that vein's a centimetre in width. The sulfides there are probably 1 millimetre to 2 millimetres in width. You only need 2 veins of this material on a metre basis to actually get you 1 gram a tonne gold. So if you work out your maths, that's 2% to get 1 gram, 2 millimetres to get you 1 gram over 1,000 millimetres. The individual grade of that sulfidic zone down the middle there is extremely high. I think the calc is 500 plus grams. So phenomenal. So it's important you capture, recognize and understand the controls and the distribution of these veins, because this is your vein niche mineralization for the vertical extent of the Mungana style systems. So how do we throw it all together? So this is just something we whipped up. So we view that the Mungana system is obviously classic zone. So the early days of the base metal dominated systems with accessory gold is not, we're just looking at a beautifully zoned system, as everyone here on this call would know. We look at the zonation, we see white quartz vein fractures up to 1% in the upper zones. Laminated quartz veins go all the way from the bottom all the way through up to, in this level, the high grade. This is the high grade event, the silica grey breccias sit in this intervening zone through here. Epidote sits throughout. The whole thing sits internal to a large biotite magnetite hornfels aureole. Ceresite is dominated down in the lower parts all the way through to the lower to middle part of the base metal section, and when it transitions to fine grained ceresite illite to the top. The sheeted veins, the bismuth telluride sheeted veins, from this level down and through here, so in the middle of the copper zone all the way through to the base of the base metal zone. Brecciation occurs and is systematic throughout. Skarns down at depth are hundreds of meters in width to the surface stuff, which is down to meters in width. We see strong albite on the periphery, grading out to weak albite as we get further out. In the upper zones, we see green garnet, and the transition is pretty dramatic into brown garnet. While astenite, when you see it, reflects the deeper part of the system up to the midpoint of the gold window. Clinopyroxene similarly, in the deeper part to the lower parts of the gold window, where you transition across in through to scapolite. For those people who have worked in the ISA region, scapolite is just a classic spotty recognition in the drill core or on surface. And you see barite in the upper parts of the sequence as well. The deeper parts obviously have magnetite. You see some beautiful photos of obviously the rig light in red dome, but it transitions rapidly into hematite. Actinolite sits in the base or base of the gold window all the way through. Carbonates are really important. Really important. The basal components of these systems are calcite dominated. They then go up into iron, magnesium, manganoan carbonates, and the top of it is dominated by sideritic carbonate. The gold window, so this is the economic portion, sits in this intervening zone right in through here. There is, when you niche sample on surface, you still in the upper zones can get some high grades. And looking for the bonanza grades on surface is obviously a key factor. So silver is dominated obviously in the upper zone compared to the lower zone. So if you actually calculate your gold silver ratios in these things, your individual system will have a unique characteristic, and it's a great technique to use to understand your metasomatic system. Copper is dominated in the lower parts of the system and weak thereafter. The key gold mineralization event is the bismuth telluride event, is associated in through here. Moly is all through the basal parts. Zinc and lead in the upper parts. Tin, tungsten in the lower parts, and of course, as you would expect, arsenic, antimony in the upper parts of the system as well. What about the geochemical model? So what you actually see is you see rhyolites from the base all the way through to the top. You see breccias all the way through from the lower parts to the top. And here we're talking about 1.5 to 2 Ks of vertical extent. Again, we've mentioned the moly halo in a horizontal sense is 100 to 500 meters. Similarly, the gold at point 1 is probably 100 meters, maybe 100 meters. The upper part goes to 50 meters all the way through, and you see the zonation about what you would see in soils above. You see these, so your soil signature recognition criteria should be small little peaks in gold, and this reflects probably localized along structures with weak but coherent bismuth anomalies, copper anomalies, and laterally extensive lead and zinc anomalies further out from that. So how does the Mungana model fit into the scheme of things? Well, Nick Lissawick and Greg Morrison published a presentation in the AIG, I think a few years ago, actually, Peter. Here it is. So you can actually see the characterization of Mount Wright here in the middle. But there's the schematic model for the Mungana red dome systems. There's effectively potentially two gold windows. So there's a gold window down here associated with the porphyry event and the associated different mineralization styles, be it skarns, stockworks, breccias, or other replacements. And there's the potential for the epithermal component up above, albeit fundamentally different to the classic Drummond Basin style epithermals as well. And of course, I put this photo in here on the right-hand side of Ravenswood. So what happens on a micro meso and a larger scale is comparable. This is from a vein in the Ravenswood field, and at the base we have our laminated higher temperature vein systems going into our pyrrhotite greater than pyrite zone, our pyrite greater than pyrrhotite zone, a small zone of marcasite, which is reflecting a temperature change. So this is all getting cooler as we go up this vein, and finishing off at the very, very top here with our base metal carbonate. Again, with classic arstopyrite rimming the blackjack here, or the sphalerite. Again, reflecting the reduced nature of these fluids coming off these mineralized rhyolites moving forward. So what you see on a large scale, you see on a small meso and micro scale as well. So in conclusion, let's talk about the geology. So these are polymetallic intrusive related gold deposits. The large surface footprint is characterized typically by extensive old occurrences and big broad geochemical anomalies. The fantastic databases put together by both TerraSearch and Map2Mine in terms of the soils, the streams and all that sort of stuff indicate the broad expression of these things. Type 1 is identifiable on tens of kilometres. Type 2 is a little bit less predictable. These systems are zoned laterally and vertically, and they are quasi-predictable on a system basis, but not predictable in terms of a metal loci basis. The host rocks and the structure predicate and dictate the morphology and form of the mineralization. Lithological contacts are key in the ore controls. Geophysically, what do we see? We see everyone here would understand the characteristic magnetic signature. All that does, however, is indicate the potential for the system. It does not indicate the fertility or the ore location. These things are awesome IP targets, and in theory, they are great airborne EM targets. Hint, hint. Airborne EM should work. My feeling is that gravity data and high quality gravity data will, in term of delivering future discoveries, will become very critical as well. Geochemistry works a treat, both in surface or in drill hole, and our igneous fertility is something I suggest people relook at and treat in identifying the preferred individual rhyolites. So you can actually go down to rhyolite A is better than rhyolite B if you look at the zirconium side of the equation. So what is the opportunity moving forward? Well, my feeling is that the opportunity for type 1s, the XY direction greater than the Z direction deposits, they're undercover. These surface ones have been identified because of their large lateral and significant footprints. The type 2, the pencil type, I believe that this is the opportunity in the northeast Queensland domain, but they'll have the upper expression of these things will be characterised by the metal zonation I've quickly taken you through today. And of course, there's still the potential for these things is really good undercover. From a financial perspective, obviously there's still work in progress here. I think there's work to do on how we extract full value from these sorts of systems in terms of both the techniques and also how we apply this undercover. I think that's probably about it, Pete. Thanks very much.
Oh, thanks, Cam. I'll get you to keep that slide up there. Is there meant to be some text on that slide?
Particularly, just left it off, Pete.
Oh, you did? Good. We'll just stick with a nice, pretty picture there. There are plenty of questions coming through. I'll kick it off, though. with a question about your, there was one of those cross sections there where you were talking about the chert, which is the Albite alteration, which seemed to be only on one side. Is that an old interpretation? Is it completely surrounding or just on the one side?
Yeah, so Peter, all these deposits sit on big stratigraphic and structural contacts, and then the red dome example here that I've flicked up, it sits on the contact between the carbonate and the siliclastic unit. Again, massive rheology contrast. So the carbonate rocks sound all well and funky and reactive, but in real life, they're terrible rocks. To get into these things, fracture them up is really, really tough. They anneal rapidly, and the generation and creation of open space is really tough. On the other hand, you get a laminated sequence of siliclastics here. The amount of reactivation, remember in the red dome example here, the rocks are vertical. Your bedding is vertical, so it's already somewhat higher strain than other regions as well. The component of reactivation on that and the opportunity for fluid flow up certain individual units, and you'll see that the Albite takes out certain beds first compared to other ones, is a much greater priority.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of, you'll be glad to know that a few experts were listening in. Greg Morrison points out that the Mountain Right paper was 2013. Email him if you want it. And he also makes a comment, in many IRGD, the massive hard chert that turns out to be Albite rock is bleached hornfels. That is in itself a guide to the nearby intrusion. On 10 of these, these have relic patches of chocolate-coloured bleach secondary biotite. This is common at Mount Lation, and there is also Albite with K-feldspar close to all phase intrusions at Mount Lation. Secondary biotite that makes the big mag anomaly at Mount Lation has one of the main reasons the system was recognised for its, I think that's meant to be true scale.
Yep, all great points, and thank you very much, Greg.
Fantastic. A few questions here. We've got one from Anthony Truelove. Can you use sodium feldspar staining test to look at Albite distribution, and has it been done?
Yes, you would be able to. It wouldn't come up with a positive result, and I believe it probably would have been done. But obviously, one of the most effective ways to obviously use something like the GADS system that was available in Townsville, Tony.
Excellent. One from Doug Young. Cam, on slide 22, you show a copper zone below the gold zone. However, earlier you stated that copper fell away with depth. Is that a supergene effect?
Peter, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I lost you there for a moment. I'm not sure on that one, Peter. I'll have to revert to that. But it's just what we saw at that stage of the model putting together, Pete.
Okay. Question here from Simon. What is the paragenesis of the base metal of Mungana relative to the gold, bearing in mind that the base metals have considerable strike extent, potentially strata-bound, unlike the pencil-like gold mineralisation?
Yeah, look, the morphology and the system understanding suggests that they're related for sure, but my understanding is that there's also recent age data to say that there's a spatial separation as well. So, look, just the pure association of the base metal halos with things, with the gold and copper zones indicate that there's a clear geological relationship.
Excellent. Question from Ian Cooper. Have you seen any tourmaline in the alteration?
Yes, we have.
And is that confined to a particular area, or is it fairly widespread?
I have to go back through my notes, Pete. I'm sorry. Yep.
No worries. One from Gordon.
But good point, Ian. I knew you'd pick me up on
that. Question from Gordon Saul. Classic pyrolytic alteration at depth? Question mark. A la Roger, etc.
Again, I can't recall, Peter. I'm sorry.
Okay. David Cohen asks, seems that nearly all the targets discussed could be detected on 300 to 400 metre space regional multi-element G-Chem.
I think that even if you pushed it out to 400 by 400 metres, you would be uniquely surprised.
Excellent. Good to see that G-Chem still works. Chris Senna.
And that goes for undercover as well. If you were doing, like I really feel that there's an opportunity undercover here. So if you were actually exploring undercover, your RAB lines or your air core lines or your Scout RC holes, you should be able to define and vector into your systems on 400 by 400 as the closest density you need to get to, for sure.
Could you push that out to 600 or 800 or maybe even a kilometre and looking at the 10 and 20 ppb level?
Yes, for sure. That's why I raised the point about these systems with X and Y versus Z. Absolutely. The 1K by 1K offset grid is a unique spacing for these style of systems.
Okay, and David just adds there, in which case the pH meter might be the best device.
I think that's a really good call.
Excellent. Okay, moving on. Chris Sennett asks, do you think the top of the rhyolite may be a dome that has been eroded off?
Again, I'm probably not the right person. Greg would know more than that, but I have never seen in all my travels the documented evidence for an extrusive component to these systems.
Okay. Rod Carlson asks, what do you believe controls the pencil intrusion locations?
Tough question, Rod. Obviously the structure and the underlying batholiths. That's why I point back to the fact that I think moving forward, detailed gravity is obviously going to be important. You have to be not on, but adjacent these big structures, these big geological breaks.
Okay. So do you think they have a lot of similarities to, say, the North Parkes pencil porphyries and their formation, or is it a completely different beast?
In terms of form and geometry, yeah, but there's obviously different components, Peter. I mean, yep. These are felsic reduced style systems versus the oxidized classic porphyry copper gold style things like we see in New South Wales, or gold copper style things with the alkalic environment.
Yep. Question from Gordon Saul. No epidote or chloride depth?
Epidote throughout the entire component of the system. Yep.
And do you know then, is there any GChem difference in the epidote as you go out, or is it all? I
don't know. I couldn't comment.
No
perhaps that's a great study for the codes guys moving forward in their green rock work.
Yeah, might well be. Henry Tavar, is Mungana red dome a skarn or IRG style system, or both?
So IRGD is a bag name for a complex series of different styles of system that manifest as breccia pipes, sheeted vein arrays, 3D vein arrays, skarns, and other styles of replacement bodies up top.
Okay, thanks for that. Stuart Reckner asks, what proved to be the most efficient method orientation to draw these targets?
Getting out on the ground and looking at the rocks, Peter, undoubtedly. Having great data sets, putting your data together, understanding what previous explorers have done, and a great team of motivated individuals.
Excellent. So I guess a lot of it was still done in more traditional methods and didn't get into some of the tools that are being used these days. If you, say, chucked on a couple of metres of cover, would people have gone out there and tested for this, or do you think that the geophysical signature would have been strong enough?
I mean, that's my point. I think, and look, I'm cognizant of the fact that in my early days too, cover scared me, but cover doesn't scare us anymore. I think there are great opportunities moving out laterally under cover, using things like the mag, other geophysical techniques like airborne in conjunction with your geochemistry. It's going to cost a bit more, but I think the rewards are certainly there, and that's the opportunity.
Absolutely. A couple of comments from Greg Morrison at Mungana. He thinks it's a dome top. I think that was in reference to the rhyolite question earlier on. And at Mungana and Red Dome and Mount Wright, the porphyries top out. They are not eroded domes, whereas Mount Carlton, the domes are well preserved.
Answer to the question. Fantastic.
And last question we've got here, we'll let you go very shortly. Doug Young asks, are we looking at an extensional terrain for the large XY system versus compressional for the pencil cases?
I think they all form the same. I've got my strong and firm beliefs with regard to the processes that bring these in. I think someone like Brett Davis is probably more appropriate to talk to, but I'm a huge fan of compressional events akin to what you see in the Andean terrains and other parts of New South Wales and the Lachlan as well. So, Doug, I believe that these things come in under a big shunt.
Okay, excellent. And we do have one last question that's stuck in there. How do you compare the Northeast Queensland AIG-ALS systems to the Southeast?
There are similar systems certainly in the Southeast as well. And the classic one I draw your attention to is the area north of Mudgee. There's classic intrusive related systems there. And I cannot remember the name of the base metal district up there for the life of me. Perhaps someone can assist me here. But they're there, but they're not as productive. They're not as productive. And they're certainly in Victoria as well. And there are other parts of Eastern Australia as well that have these style of systems.
Okay, excellent. Oh, that's the end of the questions. Thanks very much for your time, Cam. I'd like to give you a one-person round of applause on behalf of the 100-odd people who tuned in, which is great to see. And we wish you success with your work with Newcrest and enjoying the Paterson province while it's a little bit cooler at the moment. In the meantime, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks' time for the next RPGeo talk.
Thanks Peter. Thanks for the invitation, and good hunting out there, everyone. All the very best.